Hello everyone, welcome back. Yeah, sit up straight and did we all have a nice lunch? Yes. Yeah, latecomer. Yeah, really lovely. So, well, we had a fantastic morning, and conversations that have been over lunch as well have been really good. I've been earwigging as well, and it's really great. It's really sparking debate, and I really hope that we all take this, and also because this has been recording, I really hope that people listening to this will go away and take something back to their practice, to their communities, to their friends, to their business colleagues, and really start sparking and asking those questions as well about how we can design better. Derek mentioned this morning about reducing heat islands and things like that in a bigger picture in the urban environment, and just imagine what we're doing actually inside the buildings, which is what we're obviously talking about here a lot. So this afternoon, this is about the sort of practical application of biophilic design in the workplace. We have already sort of spoke about it, but we're going to kind of anchor conversations around that. So, so if you've got questions about that, it's just going to sort of spark debate as we go along. I think I'm actually just going to kick off because we just mentioned it, and because I've got to that age where my brain will go, oh, I forgot about it. Moss and preserved moss. So I love all these plants and stuff and other things, but as I mentioned earlier this morning, I'm very much about acoustics and about sound in the workplace, and you mentioned about Alice. You mentioned about neurodiversity, people who are on that in that space, and we're all like that sometimes. It's not like that we are one or the other. Sometimes workplaces are so noisy, and being able to create spaces, or if you're in an accident and emergency and all this kind of thing, but where it can muffle it. And Joyce, we were just downstairs looking at the moss, and I'm going to have to hold my hand up here when people have said preserved moss, because I've never seen one close up before, and I've got to this age and I haven't. I didn't realise it was soft. I know, it's soft. Yes, I know, and because I'm experiential, and I went close to it, and the sound, it just absorbs the sound. So I'm going to ask Adrian, expert here, kind of, can you give us some examples maybe of where you may have installed it in environments where obviously you need natural light for real planting, but has there been any sort of like things that that really kind of spring to mind where you have installed it, where you think, that really worked really well there for whatever reasons?
Quite a few locations really. So again, I think the point about the Nordic moss, the major benefit is it is virtually maintenance free. So compared to having real plants, you've got that whole maintenance aspect, which is a cost aspect, and the advantage over against, like we talked about artificial plants, the advantage with moss is it's real. So it is a real product, and as you say, you can go up and you can feel it, and it's real. It's a fantastic product, and you can use it in all sorts of situations. From an acoustic perspective, it does have, as you say, very good acoustic properties. So we've used it I was just actually thinking, we've used it in some schools where some of the main atrium areas, we've put kind of strips right the way around the main halls just to basically help with that acoustic aspect. Mike, have you got some other examples where we've used moss? Yes, so Blythesdon Square Hotel, the new spa there, the main corridors, we've done the whole walls are all covered with moss.
Is it open yet?
Yeah, it's open. Yeah, you can go. Yeah. So again, it's a really interesting what they've done with that whole. A lot of what they've done at Blythesdon Square is to bring in the Scottish Highlands feel to it, the really natural. You're in touch with nature. They brought that right the way through the whole hotel, but particularly in the spa. So we're in the whole spa area. The central corridor is moss, completely covered with moss. It looks really.
Space Solutions in Glasgow.
Yeah. So Space Solutions. We've got a full moss wall there. So you can probably tell us what it's like.
You've got in the space in the Glasgow office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just
And it incorporates the logo as well.
Yeah.
So it's been so it's different colours.
Yeah.
Multicolour.
Yeah.
Intense and quiet come into the space and you see it and think, oh great, look at that, let's have it in our space.
Yeah.
Because they've never seen
Yeah.
moss, probably don't able to go out and touch it and feel it.
And do you reckon it helps from an acoustic perspective when you're in the space using it?
Definitely sounds
Yeah.
brilliant in the
Yeah.
office.
Because it's quite a big open office space, isn't it? Which
So it absorbs a lot of the noise.
so yeah, no, it definitely does have a very good effect for that sort of thing.
But also there'll be areas where you can't put live plants if it's
Yeah.
too dark.
Yeah.
So it's a great alternative
Yeah,
in those environments.
yeah. And I should imagine as well if you've got branding, because you can sort of dye them, can't you, a little? So you can kind of like create sort of shapes and that sort of thing as well. So, yeah,
Yeah, you can do all sorts of things with it.
yeah,
One at the top of the stairs.
yeah, yeah. The one with the Banksy, yeah. Isn't that brilliant? Yeah, so you can get really creative with it. I mean, and I think that's what for me, biophilic design is about joy. It is. I did an interview with the CEO for Maggie's Cancer Care Centres, and she was just saying, because obviously they bring biophilic design in those places where people are going through all the cancer and the families are there and they're trying to process life change and stuff. But she was talking about, how there's the crunch of the floor as you go in, and I was saying, well, what is it for you? What is biophilic design? She went, and it's joy. And that was like my sort of third or fourth podcast, and that stayed with me the whole time. And it's actually one of the threads that filters through. And like you say about those, what was the moment, the magic moment? What was it? Sparkle moment? See, I was just testing. So yeah, sparkle moment. But it's just those little things that just give you that uplift, those little moments of, ooh, and I think it's so important. Savannah, I was just going to ask you, in PLP, obviously when they did the whole sort of immersive thing, what would you say were like the kind of some of those sort of moments for you? There's the space. What were some of the installations or some element of the installation that created that moment of ooh?
For me personally, and I guess for some others, it was the plant chandelier. It was so lovely to sit under and have the plants draped down and feel like you're in this secluded spot where only you know, and it's by a beautiful view of the window. And as Joyce was talking about earlier, we have really great views in our office. Like, we are in Aldgate, so you see the Tower of London, you see all the most iconic skyscrapers in London, and just to have the juxtaposition of being in the secure plant sphere of a chandelier, but then looking out to the broader city, that's just really beautiful, and a little sparkle moment.
It's really nice. So obviously go off on a tangent on sort of like moss walls and plants and stuff, but Joyce, for you, what other aspects of biophilic design do you think that maybe we haven't touched on yet, or maybe what we have, but you just want to sort of drill down a little bit more to kind of highlight to designers, this is what we really should be including in the workplace, because this is just obviously we're talking mostly about the workplace. So,
While we were on the acoustic subject, actually, one of our earlier experiments was to look at sound as well. So we did introduce some biophilic sound in an immersive scenario. It's not just about visual connections, but then creating that atmosphere. So we did try to let the participant to play natural sound, not the whole day, but proportionate. So the question is, if you are in an open space, how do you introduce that, that moment? One of the outcomes that come out, not quantitatively, but qualitatively, people really use that as a means to focus. So some kind of water, fall features, and forest bird sound helps them to be in the space. So something we can consider beyond spatial strategies.
I also make a point to that. It was actually quite funny how they negotiated that, because at first when we said like natural sounds, they put on jungle sounds, and people were not happy. They were like, I can't have any more of this. And so then we had to dictate no, it's only like rainfall sounds or like really soft water sounds, and then people were happy and would talk about it really fondly. But we had to negotiate that in the very beginning of what we meant.
And it creates some kind of conversation. Remember, we were talking, and suddenly you in the background, and then people start to talk. Yeah. I mean, in the design process, it's very much about engaging people, isn't it?
And people were engaged, I would say.
Yeah. It's a non-rhythmic thing, isn't it? I mean, we talk about non-rhythmic movement, but actually it's a non-rhythmic sound as well, isn't it? Because as if things keep repeating, then it's not natural. And you talk about neurodiversity, you know, maybe I am. Well, I personally, I pick up the repeated sounds, but maybe that's the musician thing. But Derek, I know you talk a lot about senses, and you advocate the sort of like designing for sort of multi-sensory experience. I mean, maybe you could you, if you can, sort of explain a little bit about how biophilic design can really support our senses, and maybe maybe a couple of design implementations that we could kind of consider. We've sort of chatted sound and bird sound, obviously the acoustics and things.
Well, I mean, looking at the Japanese research on forest bathing, some of the things that emerge from that is that trees or plants, greenery generally, there are emanations from those things that affect the hormone system. I mean, they're measured things like blood pressure and all of those things and stress level things, but there's extra things about the hormone system, and I showed you this morning the interconnections of that because that relates to emotions. The actual smell aspects of plants, not something always very distinctive like smelling a rose, but something that may not have that perfume aspect, but is still something that affects the olfactory system. And the olfactory system is your best sense of memory. That's a well-known thing. So I think to know more about those aspects of plants. Now, we don't know all of that. I don't know how much you categorise when you're selecting plants and whether that comes into it or not.
We sometimes get asked about it.
Yes. So I think that's an area probably we need to do more. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the other things, about the fractal nature coming to fore. We spoke about curvature, shapes, and so on. The other thing which is interesting is dappled light. Dappled light in spaces, I think, is so beautiful, and because you get this variation again between shadow and bright light. So again, plants are sort of ideal for that. Then there is some measurements about, you probably got something on moisture content, CO2 levels. You probably got some characteristics for those, you know about that. So there is a slight, shall we say in general, a space with plants is fresher than ones without plants, broadly speaking. So you can see that really plants or greenery generally influences all of our senses to varying degrees, whether it's something that diffuses sound, or it's the smell, it's obviously the vision. I don't know so much about touch unless you're a tree hugger, the touch, bark of trees, so maybe we should include that as well. I mean, it's so rich. There's very little else, and the colour of plants, contrasting plants. But it's affecting, the plant affects not just the cognitive part of the brain, it affects the amygdala, which is the emotional response in the brain. And that is really very, very important. So I think the research on plants will continue to find more detail about those sort of aspects. But those of you who are really interested, it's worthwhile digging into the Japanese literature. It's very good.
Yeah, the whole sort of Shinrin Yuko, the forest bathing, because they brought that out, didn't they? Because all their workers were getting so stressed out that the actual Japanese government said, right, okay, we're going to prescribe forest bathing. So that's where that came from. And so obviously to try and help their well-being. So there's, you talk about the sort of non-rhythmic, I talk about the non-rhythmic, but you were talking about the dappled light. And if you think about that in nature, and if you think about most workplaces as well, they're very still. I mean, apart from us not walking around and kind of like tearing our hair out and sort of like rubbers falling all over the place, razors falling all over the place. But if you can create like, you can do it with mobiles. You kind of have like things that kind of, so that you've got, so like in the schools, for instance, you can just create that little bit of movement in a space, and in your own home office kind of environment. If you're finding, you can just, by putting a plant in, like something like that, where it does, especially if you've got the window open and it just moves just so slightly, that also makes us feel good, doesn't it? It's this kind of, there's life, I suppose, isn't it? That it's not just, because if you think about from the environmental psychology point of view, if it's completely still, it's just before a storm, or there's a tsunami. It's like, or something's going to pounce and eat you. So it's all that sort of thing. And the touch. So go on.
No, I was just going to add in another thing, which is an unknown. So I'm not going to tell you any knowledge particularly, but some of you may have heard that the electrical content in the atmosphere, ions, anybody use ions? No? Have you heard about ions?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's a big debate. Americans are very keen on them. Some of the Swedish researchers feel they do have an effect, and there's no doubt about it that electromagnetic atmospheres might affect us some way, because every organ in our body has an electromagnetic field in it. So it's hard to believe it has no effect at all. The data on phones, for example, and televisions is still in the air. But I don't know. See, plants may have their own electric field. If you do kinesiology studies, have shown that onions, for example, and various vegetables have auras around them. And I would be very interested to know more about the auras of plants. Now, those auras would have some electromagnetic thing there, and within that, it may be that the plant room, the negative ions, which are better for you than positive ions, increases. When you go into a clothes shop, for example, a tailor's shop, it absorbs the negative ions, materials absorb, and you land with a positive ion. That's why it's so stuffy in clothes shops sometimes. It's the ion content. Now, whether you get more negative ions with a biophilic room in it than not, that would really be an interesting study to do. So that's an aspect which could be of some importance. I mean, some of you may not believe this sort of stuff, but there's something about it somewhere.
Does the humidity have an aspect? Does that play a part in that?
Well, that would, because that would influence the ion droplets and therefore disposition. So if you had a very humid room, the negative ions would probably go down. And negative ions are basically good for us, basically.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it, really? And I know they've done studies in retail, for instance, that if you have biophilia and planting in your retail shop, people spend more because they're happy, and it's like they're content, and it's a comfortable, back to this word comfort, it's a comfortable environment, so we do spend more. And I don't know. I don't know if I can. I suppose I can. Maybe we can cut this bit out. But Marks and Spencers and there's another clothing retailers. When you go in, there's like a smell of static. There's like something, and like you say, some of them are stuffy, and you don't know why. And you and it is as you say, they absorb these ions that are in the air. That's why it's good for us to be in nature, because there is that, and it's a real thing. It is a real thing. These negative. It's like when it rains. It switches it, so we have the negative, and it's good for us. So, so I'm just gonna ask the question to ask the audience. From you, I mean, we spoke a little bit this morning about it, but what sort of are you coming up against when you're trying to implement change or biophilic design into a design? If you're going to go to in a space, obviously you come up with the plans and you design it and things, but what are there sort of regular things that are coming up? I mean, it could be finance, it could be practicality, it could be what sort of challenges? I mean, it can be completely random. Just you can throw sort of just ideas out. Really, what sort of challenges are you finding?
The capital cost, and I noticed it was on the slides. The capital cost versus the OPEX cost.
Right.
So I always find, like, when you're talking projects and things like that, the capital guys holding the purse strings and the capital cost will want the lowest thing. So I always use the example of lockers. A locker with a key is the cheapest option for a capital cost, but actually from an operational perspective, it adds a lot of time and hassle. The So I think it's trying to, you know, what can we do to kind of sell to both of those parties that are holding those capital costs as well as the OPEX costs, to really show that return, you know, getting the capital guys to buy in and getting the FM guys, because I've been on so many projects where the FM people, no, I don't want to look after the plants, they're just gonna get dusty, they're gonna die, you know, it's challenging those conversations.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think also, value engineering, first thing to come out is the artwork, and then straight away it's anything else like the planting, you know. So it's how you, as you say, have the, keep the bean counters happy, the accountants, by showing the kind of logistic data, the actual money works, you know, it's worth putting capital costs into that. But then it's, as I say, just selling to everybody else that it's not something that you can just cross off as a extravagance, you know, it's the first thing to come out, you know, and just get them into this, get them out of that kind of grain that they're ingrained into about making savings, you know, this isn't just like an extra, this is actually part of the design. So it's how we get that narrative going and you know, tell the story more to people. I think we're getting there more and more. It's still an upward struggle with some clients, but
Maybe it's the value, so maybe it's the total cost of ownership model. So over a period of time, what's the value return and what do we measure as the most important thing?
It's hard to find clients though that will look at that. And especially when you've got FM contracts turning over, you know, and how those contracts change hands. But I can hand on heart say I have not been part of conversations with a client in the last 5 years who really honestly talked about total cost of ownership.
What's their main criteria? What do they measure?
That
Just
capital,
money,
that first capital cost, because as soon as those project managers hand over that physical environment, it's drop and run.
The other thing you can do from, if you're looking at the plants bit, is there is an aspect of you can put plants onto a rental, so you can actually rent the plants with the maintenance, which takes it out of a capital budget and spreads it over 3 years, 5 years, whatever you want, which does mean it pushes the cost into a different purse, but it does take it out of a capital thing if you need that.
and perhaps it's allowing for the infrastructure in the original bill with you know, like the upfront costs, so that they can be added later on, or on a rental basis. They're not suddenly, oh, this is just an extra. It's still part of the design.
Yeah, and I also think perhaps sometimes it's not really about not having the money, it's about how you spend it. With investor client, I'm currently working on a 1.2 billion program, and yet there's no budget allocated to biophilic design, and I wonder why. So I think it's quite important to, as we have done in this research, to try to put it in, you know, other aspect of spending when you capture benefit through, you know, that benefit realization business case process. Use their own language, and then try to map it into the other spending when they do the cost and benefit analysis. We might be able to find a way. I'm not saying that this is, you know, bulletproof, but it's to put it back.
I think you've been there by using yourselves. You've already done fantastic research and the kind of accounting part of it. You know. But having precedent studies that you can actually just physically take the client, you know, so they feel that they're not guinea pigs. And this has been done before and it's been done well, and they can ask face value questions to the stakeholder that have actually already got these buildings. And say, oh, it does work, you know.
And then the whole life cycle point, absolutely. I think if we just compare it, you know, to the first year, it would be quite a difficult argument with some of those strategies that we're really passionate about. But then if you look at that from that 90% of spending, which doesn't work in some model as you suggest, you know, if you are an owner-occupier, then yes, maybe. If you're, you know, developing something and you want to sell it, then the well-being of end user is quite, you know, distant. There's no direct relationship. So it's looking at who you're trying to speak and try to pick a model to win the argument. And the model that I pick is the government Green Book, and it has been tested in about, last year government spent about 300 billion and using this Green Book model. So the question in this research is, well, if it is something that you have been using in all your NHS spending, all your school spending, and, you know, everything that relating to taxpayer money, then maybe we can try to use it as an argument to say, this is a robust method. We apply it into this new type of thinking that could help us to bring up the conversation. But it is quite complex.
Yeah, I think if you could help us gain the tools and the references, that would be really helpful.
And that language that you talked about, like how can we work it into like the Riva Planner work or the well building standards to play back? You want to achieve this, so you're going to have to do that.
Yeah. I think that like the whole net zero, people are really, the government, more and more businesses are having to also reach that. And I think that's a really good, I mean, you mentioned that earlier about this is double-pronged, triple-pronged, as many pronged attack as we can through the well-being, through the HR, through the sustainability kind of angle. There are so many different ways, and you say it's planting, but it's not just planting. It's also about the air quality. It's also about different floorings. It's about these things that are sustainable, but also you have the Japanese have this thing called wabi-sabi, which is about how things naturally degenerate. But like when you've got a wood floor and then it has like the thoroughfare on it, but the patina can change, and actually it's embracing that and using the different materials as designers, as the creatives. And this is where it comes into. It's not, other people might come in and go, oh, we just need to stick that floor down. But us as designers, we can go, yeah, we can do that, but we can actually put different colours and different tones of wood as we go along to create walkways and pathways, which ultimately will change over time, because we understand that, and then we can create those stories, the storytelling. We can do that, back to them. Savannah, I was going to ask you, because obviously PLP architecture practice, you're obviously banging on doors to clients, and sort of you've done some biophilic design solutions there. Is there like a sort of messaging or stories or arguments that they use, or maybe I don't know, or is it that clients have approached them to say, oh, we want biophilic design? How has it been? Do you know which way around
I don't know
that's
the
been?
full extent of it, but from what I've heard is that there's a lot more interest now than there was like 5 years ago for biophilic design. But in many cases, it's still our firm, our architects, saying, we've done this research, we've done these several buildings, these are great case studies of what you could have as a client, and this is the amount of attachment or value that your project will now have once it's completed.
Yeah, it's examples, isn't it?
It is.
Like you're saying, if we've got exampps to say, well, look, they've done it, and
we can also put it into bids, BREEAM, things like that. So if you can include that in the initial opening bid, it's on the table from the start.
My boss always jokes that no one in architecture wants to be first. They always want to be second. They want to prove that it works, and then they're all for it.
Actually, I think the designers are quite enjoying being first sometimes, but it's just the clients don't want to be the guinea pigs.
No, they don't.
No.
So we have to do the research bit.
Yeah.
Clients to invest in it. But having something that does multiple things and sells it more to the client. So not only does it look great, it has the CO2, it absorbs sound. Everything has to work so hard to justify itself these days.
And I was going to say, I think that's what's great about biophilic design, because it ticks all those boxes, and it's actually pulling those arguments together to say this is what it does, and this is your.
So it's harder to quantify the return on investment, though. I think that's totally get it as a metric, but that's why I can't wait to look at the figures more intensively, with the report and things, because if we can put that quantifiable figure on it.
Unfortunately, and that's what they want, isn't it? The QSs and the bin count. But it's easier to quantify from this research and say our work. So that's an upside.
Yeah, but then you've got views of nature as well. So, I mean, from the research point of view, so actual views of nature. I mean, downstairs you've got. So I'm a visual artist. So one of my pictures downstairs, you've put planting around. So it's printed on metal. It looks 3D. So if you haven't got a window, you kind of can create these spaces. But there's ore, isn't there? We talk about ore in biophilic design. I mean, maybe we could talk about that. I mean, as a solution. Does anybody want to kind of like say anything about that?
Well, ore is like kind of part of sparkle, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, things that brighten and give you a lift in spirit. I think we're aiming for more joyful, soulful places to work, and anything. But I think biophilia has a great advantage than many things. But it's those things that are important. And we've neglected to think that. We've concentrated so much on thermal comfort and things like this. We're still doing this. The researchers in that field are still trying to define the temperature for us. We all know the temperatures we like. So I don't know how much more you can do about that, really. It's this combination. It's combining things. Synthesis, most of our scientific work since the 15th century has been deductionist in approach. You have to get a quantity and that's that. But, synthesis of combining things together is much more challenging in a way, and we're not so good at that. We're taking that. But we should take a lesson from nature because it does it automatically. It does it that. So, it's that synthesis which is important, and lots of little bits and pieces which up to now perhaps we've thought, aren't particularly important, are more important than we realise. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we talked about architecture last night when we have dinner. I think creating those sparkle moments are easier with churches, gallery, and if we're doing building like workplaces and school, I think it goes back to the point looking at maintenance. So how do we maintain that continuous happiness? It's the first impressions, but it's a continuity. It means that working with client, that it's not just the space, it's how they maintain the space, how they maintain the happiness of people as one package, as a whole.
Yeah, I think look and feel is interesting. Do you go into a space and immediately identify you like it before you really know it? Or you dislike it before you really know it? And I do that with towns and cities sometimes. I always remember first arriving in Edinburgh in '82. I didn't know the city at all, and I was immediately in love with it, sort of thing, And I couldn't tell you why particularly. And then I went to another place, Burton-on-Trent, and apart from the smell of the beer, I just didn't like it. And I thought this is very unfair of me because I had no real evidence to say why I didn't like it. And I think it's like, I often use cathedrals as an example because you see a cathedral in the distance and it looks impressive. Okay, but then you step over that threshold and go inside the building. And it's nothing to do with religion, whether you're religious or not. That aura, that atmosphere gets you and raises your curiosity or whatever it is, or spirit, uplifted spirit probably. And I think what part of this story is just creating, there's a bit of mystery here. It's not all clear. You're creating an aura, an environment of a number of different things, and certain things combine in perhaps a mysterious kind of way, but produce this aura, like, for example, you get when you step over into a cathedral space. And if we can do that kind of thing, in our workplaces and schools and so on, it's that uplift, because it's easy to go down. It's sometimes more difficult to go up. It's that what we're trying to do, and it's not calculable really. You can't really calculate and get figures on those things, and there is a bit of a mystery. There's a bit of unknown about it, but I think that's what we're seeking to do. And our experiments with doing POE and things like that is we will perhaps discover combinations that are more magical or more preferable than others. Even if we don't know exactly why it is, that would be valuable.
Do you think the whole aspect of what we were talking about telling the story,
yes,
the storytelling, that's actually part of, if you can tell a story by creating an experience.
Yes.
Again, if you've done your research into the client, what makes them tick, what makes that that customer, that client, what is their company all about,
I
and tell that in a story that actually
yes.
involves them and makes them go, wow. And that's what makes a difference.
I think it does. And what we did in this work with Joyce was some of the people you asked, they did drawings of things as well, and you could do a poem, a drawing, or a story in verbally, or write it down in a diary form. And that's very interesting, because that's people reacting in the way they describe themselves. You know, I think that's very important. We haven't done enough of that. Sorry.
I think storytelling also has a reverse effect, because, say, you as an organisation, if you tell the right story, the client will be attracted to you. So you don't even have to sell yourself to them. They'll buy into the emotion of what you're trying to say, they'll buy into your philosophy, they'll want to be part of it.
Yeah.
So I really think branding and storytelling is really, really important.
Yeah.
Ask a question, and maybe going back to more the sort of tactile side of it, where you're and that kind of sensory experience. So obviously, Adrian said, you install plants and you really have to professionally maintain them to make sure that they continue to look good. But has any kind of research gone into if people are given a bit of ownership? So maybe some of the, the staff within the building get to, if they want, to help maintain some of it, or have a little plot or something that they can develop themselves, if they wanted to get involved in that sort of side of things. If that again just kind of became a little bit more involved in nature and the growth and the kind of, so just taking ownership of what's being created for them. Is that anything, have you kind of looked into that at all?
I was going to say, like,
not part of this research, but it's the wider question of co-designing, isn't it? So there's a lot of evidence to show if you engage earlier with the end user to co-creating something. And with biophilic design, I have seen many organizations actually go out and ask what kind of plants you would prefer. I mean, not the technical terms, but really the type, what kind of texture, what kind of greenery, does it contain flowers, what kind of color, different color will have different stimulation. So you can give that. I think the difficulties is, you might get very personal opinion, like many co-designing process. So I think designer needs to make a judgment of what is right, and is taking the majority the right answer, or taking, the boss's answer as the right answer. So it's hard to say, but I think we are, going towards more the co-designing model, looking at, the social aspect of what people really need rather than what designer really wants to create,
But there are, Peter Barrett's work I referred to already again, some sort of interactive walls and so on, where pupils were involved and could bring in artwork and change and or sometimes put some quotations on or something like that. Yeah. So there was some degree of kind of what you're indicating, and I think that will probably go further in the future, probably.
I think, sorry, you finish?
No, yes. Okay.
I was just going to say that on that point, I think what you're saying about them being involved in the design, I think that's really key, because that helps them to buy in. When it comes to the maintenance, I'd probably say, my view is don't go there, because the issue is, from a commercial aspect, if the plants don't look nice, then they're not working for that environment. And if you've got somebody that's not used to doing it or doesn't do it every day, what they might do at home is up to them, and it doesn't matter really what it looks like. It's a living plant, and yes, it died a bit, but it's okay, it's going to grow again, kind of thing. But in a commercial environment, if it doesn't look great today, then it's no good. So I think that's probably, whilst it's a really nice idea, and people do say that to us, it doesn't work on a commercial level. It sounds really horrible to say that, but it's actually.
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, but there's the planting that's inside, and there's the art planting. I'd sort of say, the planting that's the corporate, the commercial, that sort of space. But there's also, and there's lots of examples of this, particularly like in the NHS and forest schools and all this sort of stuff, where the your staff is allowed this. I mean, I'm actually using that word, but they're actually encouraged. Again, the word used, activate, but they encourage the staff and the patients and people to go out to tend the plants, to do a bit of gardening, to kind of a bit of mindset, particularly like in sort of like older third generation kind of establishments, and where they're actually allowed, they're sort of made I'm trying to be careful about the words I'm using here, but encouraged to go out and use that space. So yes, there are. So biophilic design used in that way is incredibly valuable for the mental health, for the well-being. We know all about that through lockdown. And this is where all this is sort of coming from, really. And we're in a really fertile environment. I think people are more susceptible. They understand that nature connection is really good for us. We're kind of there, and we're at sort of a tipping point, I think, that to really push this over the edge to make things better. And I'm just going to say about like also food. There's like these urban farms, and where you actually in a workplace where you can have the planting and the vegetables and the lettuces and things near the salad bar, and that people can get their sandwich and they can grab a little bit of extra lettuce and put it on there. So they feel they can interact with it. So you're lifting a space in a different way. And again, you're ticking the health box, because it's like you're encouraging them to eat green. And do you know what I mean? There's like lots of different ways. And that we're really only touching on here, but there's quite a bit of stuff that's going on. If you're interested, there's the podcast series that I've got on the journal, but there's lots of examples and case studies, and like you say, people don't want to be first, but there's lots of it going on. So actually to be able to celebrate and say, look, that's going on in healthcare, that's going on in retail, that's going on in leisure and workplace and home, and so yeah.
I mean, we know like Leesman have come out with the studies recently, like one of the biggest drivers to come back to the office is social connection.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
we need to kind of be building on that. And Adrian, I totally get your fear factor of me potentially looking after plants in the office. But if it's driving that social community connection, you have a nursery to have the plants.
Yeah, but that's it, but how lovely that is. You could even get like the plant company to come in and give you lessons. And do you know what I mean? I mean, how amazing that, because that's an add-on. It's more commercial, but you know what I mean? It's like, why not? It could be so much fun. Nature's fun. We are fun. Yeah, I was just going to say we're kind of getting to a sort of point for a break now. We're going to come back afterwards, and we're going to talk about the future of biophilic design. So it's kind of really building on where we are now. And as I said, I sort of touched on the point that I think we are in a pivot point. And I know that I talk to loads of people about biophilic design, and I'm kind of, people come to me because they're in that space. But I really feel, when I started researching this like just 3 years ago, I'd Google it and there'd be about 2 or 3 things about biophilic design, and you Google it now and there's loads and loads and loads and loads, which I just think, I mean, there's some greenwashing. There is, but when you talk to people like the panel here, and they're working and living, and do you know what I mean? And you know that this is actually happening, and that people are researching it, and it's such an exciting time to be part of this movement, really, to bring us back to nature, to bring us back to who we are, to reconnect us to our own flourishing, really. So. I think on that note, go and have some coffee, recharge, come back, and then we'll go for the sort of final flourish of futuristic biophilia.